The sun was setting slowly behind the tall buildings of the university campus, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Families were gathered around, chatting happily as they celebrated the achievements of their loved ones. Among them stood Richard and Laura Carter, a married couple in their late 40s, watching their daughter Emily walk across the stage to receive her diploma. Emily had just graduated with honors in astrophysics, a subject she'd been passionate about since she was a little girl. She beamed with pride as she shook hands with the dean and held up her diploma for everyone to see. Cameras clicked all around, capturing the moment forever. Richard clapped politely, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Something felt wrong, though no one else seemed to notice. Laura glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. She could tell something was bothering him. He hadn't said much all day, which wasn't like him at all. Normally, Richard would joke around or make small talk with anyone nearby. Today, however, he seemed lost in thought, staring off into the distance as if he were somewhere else entirely. "Are you okay?" Laura whispered to him when Emily wasn't looking. Richard blinked, snapping out of whatever trance he'd been in. "Yeah, I'm fine," he muttered quickly, avoiding her gaze. But Laura knew better. They'd been married long enough for her to recognize when something was off. Still, she decided not to push it. Maybe it was just stress from work. Lately, Richard had been putting in extra hours at his engineering firm, and she figured he might just be tired. After the ceremony ended, the Carters joined the crowd moving toward the photo area. Parents posed with their graduates, laughing and hugging as they took pictures to commemorate the special day. Emily pulled her parents close, looping her arms around their shoulders. "Smile," she said cheerfully, tilting her head toward the camera. Richard forced a grin, but it looked strained. Even Emily noticed, raising an eyebrow at him. "Dad, are you feeling all right? You seem distracted." "I'm fine, sweetie," Richard replied, patting her hand awkwardly. "Just thinking about how fast time flies. Seems like yesterday." "You were starting kindergarten," Emily chuckled, clearly buying his excuse. "Time does fly. But hey, I'm still your little girl, right?" "Always," Richard said, though his voice lacked its usual warmth. Laura exchanged a worried glance with her daughter but didn't say anything. Whatever was going on with Richard, now wasn't the time to bring it up. Later that evening, the family went out to dinner at a nearby restaurant. It was a nice place, cozy and quiet, with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. Emily chattered excitedly about her plans for the future, graduate school, research opportunities, maybe even traveling abroad. Laura listened intently, nodding along and offering words of encouragement. Meanwhile, Richard picked at his food, barely touching his plate. Finally, after what felt like hours of silence, Richard cleared his throat. "Laura," he began, his tone serious. "We need to talk." The table fell silent. Emily paused mid-sentence, her fork hovering in the air. Laura set down her glass of water and turned to face him, her expression calm but wary. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. Richard hesitated, glancing briefly at Emily before focusing back on Laura. "Not here," he said under his breath. "Later." But Laura shook her head. "No, Richard, if something's bothering you, we should address it now. Whatever it is, we can handle it together." For a moment, Richard looked conflicted. Then, taking a deep breath, he blurted out, "I'm leaving you." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. Emily gasped, her eyes widening in shock. Laura froze, her fork slipping from her fingers and clattering onto her plate. For several seconds, no one spoke. The world seemed to stop spinning. "What did you just say?" Laura finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. "I said I'm leaving you," Richard repeated, louder this time. His hands clenched into fists beneath the table, betraying his nervousness. "I've met someone else. This isn't working anymore. I can't stay." Laura stared at him, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, to beg him to reconsider. But another part, a deeper, more instinctive part, knew there was more to this story than what he was saying. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her purse and pulled out an old photograph. "This is Jonathan," she said quietly, sliding the picture across the table toward him. "He's your predecessor." Richard frowned, picking up the photo and studying it closely. At first glance, it looked like a younger version of himself standing next to Laura. The resemblance was uncanny, almost eerie. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. Laura leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Before I met you, I was in love with Jonathan. He disappeared years ago under mysterious circumstances. And now—" She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Now I think you're connected to him. If you leave now, Richard, I'll make sure you never see Emily again." Richard's jaw dropped. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, struggling to process what she'd just said. Across the table, Emily watched in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the revelations unfolding before her. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. Each member of the Carter family retreated into their own thoughts, grappling with the implications of what had just transpired. Little did they know this was only the beginning of a much larger, far more dangerous mystery, one that would change their lives forever. Richard stared at the photograph in his hands, his mind racing. The man in the picture looked almost exactly like him. Same face, same build, same piercing eyes, but older with graying hair and sharper features. It was unsettling, like looking into a distorted mirror. He glanced up at Laura, searching for some kind of explanation, but her expression remained unreadable. What are you saying?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "This guy, whoever he is, he's not me." Laura didn't answer right away. She leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Finally she spoke. "His name is Jonathan. We were together years ago before I met you. He disappeared without a trace, and I never found out why. But now—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Now I think there's more to your story than you know." Emily, who had been sitting quietly until now, finally broke her silence. "Mom, what do you mean? How could Dad be connected to this guy? It doesn't make sense." Laura turned to her daughter, her gaze softening slightly. "I don't have all the answers yet, sweetheart, but something about your father has always felt different, familiar but not quite right. And now, seeing this photo again—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Richard's heart was pounding. None of this made sense. He'd lived his whole life believing he was Richard Carter, a husband, a father, an engineer. Now suddenly everything he thought he knew was being called into question. "You're telling me I'm not who I think I am?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "That I'm someone else?" "I'm not sure," Laura admitted, "but I think we need to find out. There's something bigger going on here, something dangerous. And if we don't get to the bottom of it, none of us will be safe." The weight of her words settled over the table like a heavy fog. For several minutes, no one spoke. The restaurant buzzed softly around them, waiters moving between tables, couples laughing, music playing faintly in the background. But none of it mattered anymore. Their world had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. Later that night, after they'd returned home, Laura pulled out a box from the attic. It was old and dusty, filled with papers, photographs, and other mementos from her past. She spread them out on the dining room table, motioning for Richard and Emily to join her. "Let's start at the beginning," she said, picking up another photograph. This one showed her standing next to Jonathan outside a laboratory building. Both of them wore lab coats, and they looked happy, carefree. Jonathan worked as a scientist. He was brilliant, one of the best in his field. His research focused on cloning and genetic engineering. At the time it seemed like science fiction, but he believed it was possible. Richard frowned, leaning closer to examine the photo. "Cloning? You mean like creating copies of people?" "Exactly," Laura replied. "But his work attracted attention from powerful people who wanted to use it for their own gain. One day he told me he was worried. He said someone was watching him, following him. Then just like that he vanished. No note, No goodbye. Nothing. She paused, her voice cracking slightly. I spent years searching for him, but I never found any answers. Until now. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. You think I'm a clone? That I'm some kind of copy of Jonathan? It's possible, Laura said slowly. Think about it. You show up in my life out of nowhere, claiming to have no memory of your past before we met. You look almost identical to Jonathan, and lately you've been acting strange, as if you're hiding something. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but then stopped. Deep down, he couldn't deny it. There were gaps in his memory, moments from his past that felt blurry or incomplete. He'd always brushed it off as stress or fatigue, but now he wasn't so sure. What happens next? Emily asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was quiet, trembling slightly. If Dad really is a clone or whatever, does that mean he's still our dad? Or is he someone else entirely? Laura reached across the table, taking Emily's hand in hers. No matter what we discover, he's still your father. Nothing changes that, but we need to figure out the truth, for all our sakes. Over the next few days, the Carters dove deeper into the mystery. They scoured through old documents, news articles, and research papers related to Jonathan's work. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to come together. One night, while going through a stack of files, Emily stumbled upon something shocking. "Guys, look at this," she exclaimed, holding up a document. It was a report detailing experiments conducted by a company called Nexus Innovations. The report mentioned groundbreaking advancements in cloning technology, including the creation of fully functional human replicas. Richard's stomach churned as he read the details. According to the report, these clones weren't just physical copies. They were designed to replace specific individuals, complete with fabricated memories and personalities. The goal was to create sleeper agents who could infiltrate organizations or carry out secret missions without even realizing it. "This is insane," Richard muttered, running a hand through his hair. "If this is true, then I'm not real. I'm just a tool, a puppet created by some corporation." "No," Laura said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're more than that. Whoever made you may have intended to control you, but you're still a person. You have free will, choices. That makes you real." Her words gave him a glimmer of hope, but the fear lingered. If he really was a clone, what did that mean for his future? For his family? As they continued their investigation, strange things began happening. Their home phone rang late at night, only to go silent when they answered. Odd messages appeared on Richard's computer at work, warning him to stop digging. And one morning, they woke up to find their front door wide open, though they were certain they'd locked it the night before. "It's like someone's watching us," Emily whispered during breakfast one morning. "What if they know we're onto them?" "They probably do," Laura admitted grimly. "Which means we need to be careful. From now on, we can't trust anyone, not even people we think we know." Despite the growing danger, Richard refused to back down. Something inside him, a flicker of determination he couldn't explain, drove him forward. Maybe it was Jonathan's memories surfacing, or maybe it was simply his love for his family. Either way, he vowed to uncover the truth no matter the cost. "We'll get through this," he told Laura and Emily one evening, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling around them. Together, and for the first time in days, they allowed themselves to believe it might actually be true. The Carters spent every waking moment piecing together clues about Jonathan's disappearance and Richard's mysterious origins. Days turned into weeks, and the pile of evidence on their dining room table grew larger. Laura became obsessed with uncovering the truth, staying up late into the night poring over old research papers and news articles. Emily helped too, using her knowledge of astrophysics to analyze technical data related to Nexus Innovations experiments. As for Richard, he struggled to process everything he was learning about himself. One evening, while scrolling through an encrypted file on his laptop, Emily gasped loudly. "Guys, look at this," she exclaimed, pointing at the screen. On it was a list of names, people who had been involved in Nexus Innovations' cloning project. One name stood out: Dr. Evelyn. "Grant, who's that?" Richard asked, leaning closer to get a better view. "She's mentioned here as the lead scientist," Emily explained, scrolling down to read more. "It says she developed advanced neural implants capable of rewriting memories. She also oversaw the creation of clones." Laura frowned, her brow furrowing as she processed the information. "If she's behind all this, then she knows what happened to Jonathan, and why you were created, Richard." Richard felt a lump form in his throat. The idea of being nothing more than a science experiment made him feel hollow, like a stranger, in his own body. But there was something else nagging at him, an odd sensation deep within his mind, almost like flashes of forgotten memories trying to surface. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts aside for now. They needed to focus on finding answers. The next morning, Laura decided they should visit Jonathan's old laboratory. It had been abandoned years ago, but she hoped it might still hold some clues. The drive took them several hours, winding through desolate countryside until they reached a crumbling building surrounded by dense woods. Vines crept up the walls, and broken windows stared back like empty eyes. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily muttered as they stepped out of the car. Despite her unease, she followed her parents inside, flashlight in hand. The interior was dark and musty, filled with rusted equipment and dusty shelves. Laura led the way, navigating the maze-like corridors with surprising confidence. "This
is where Jonathan worked," she said softly, running her fingers over a cracked workbench. "He used to spend hours here, talking about his dreams of changing the world." As they explored further, Richard noticed something strange: a locked
door hidden behind a stack of crates. "Let me try opening it," he said, stepping forward. To everyone's surprise, the lock clicked open effortlessly when he touched it, as if it recognized him somehow. Behind the door was a small room containing a desk, a computer, and rows of filing cabinets. On the desk lay a journal, its pages yellowed with age. Laura picked it up and began flipping through it, her hands trembling slightly. "It's Jonathan's," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "These are his notes, from before he disappeared." The entries detailed his growing paranoia about being watched, as well as cryptic references to Project Echo. According to the journal, Project Echo was a secret initiative aimed at creating perfect replicas of individuals for espionage purposes. Jonathan had discovered that his own DNA was being used without his consent, and he feared he would be replaced. Or worse. "He knew," Laura said, her voice breaking. "He knew they were coming for him." Suddenly, Richard doubled over, clutching his head. A sharp pain shot through his skull, followed by a flood of fragmented images. Bright lights, cold metal tables, voices speaking in hushed tones. He stumbled backward, gasping for air. "Richard!" Laura rushed to his side, gripping his arm tightly. "What's wrong?" I don't know," he stammered, his breathing ragged. "It's like memories. Not mine, but someone else's. Jonathan's." Emily looked terrified. "Does that mean you're starting to remember things he went through?" "I think so," Richard admitted, rubbing his temples. "But it's not clear, just flashes, pieces." Laura exchanged a worried glance with her daughter. Whatever was happening to Richard, it was getting stronger and more dangerous. That night, as they drove home, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, he spotted the same black SUV trailing them at a distance. At first, he thought it might just be paranoia. But when the vehicle sped up and began tailgating them, his suspicions were confirmed. "They're onto us," he said grimly, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Hold on." He accelerated, weaving through traffic as the SUV gave chase. Laura and Emily clung to their seats, hearts pounding as headlights flashed and horns blared around them. Finally, Richard managed to lose the pursuers by taking a series of sharp turns down narrow side streets. When they arrived home, shaken but unharmed, Laura immediately called the one person she trusted, an old friend named Daniel, who worked as a private investigator. She explained the situation briefly, leaving out the more unbelievable details about clones and memory implants. "You need protection," Daniel said firmly after hearing her story. "I'll send someone over tonight to keep watch. In the meantime, stay alert. These people sound dangerous." True to his word, Daniel sent over a burly man named Marcus, who stationed himself outside the house. For the first time in days, the Carters felt a sliver of safety, but they knew it wouldn't last long. Over the next few days, Richard continued to experience strange episodes where fragments of Jonathan's memories surfaced unexpectedly. Sometimes, it was just fleeting images or sounds, but other times it felt like entire scenes playing out in his mind. He saw glimpses of labs, scientists in white coats, and machines humming with energy. Each vision left him more confused and more determined to uncover the truth. One night, while everyone else was asleep, Richard sat alone in the living room, staring at the photograph of Jonathan. He traced the outline of the man's face with his finger, feeling a strange connection to him. Was he truly a copy of this man? Or was there something more to his existence? Before he could dwell on it further, a loud crash echoed from outside. Richard bolted upright, heart racing. Peering through the curtains, he saw two masked figures sneaking toward the house. Without hesitation, he grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and moved to wake Laura and Emily. "We've got company," he whispered urgently, shaking them awake. "Get downstairs, now." The intruders broke in moments later, smashing windows and kicking open doors. Richard confronted them head-on, swinging the bat with surprising strength and precision. It was as if his body moved on its own, guided by instincts he didn't understand. Within minutes, both attackers were unconscious, on the floor. Breathing heavily, Richard turned to face his stunned family. "We can't stay here anymore," he said firmly. "They'll keep coming until they silence us. We need to leave, tonight." Laura nodded, already gathering essential items into a bag. Emily hesitated, looking scared but resolute. Together, they slipped out of the house under the cover of darkness, knowing their lives would never be the same again. Whatever awaited them next, they would face it together, as a family. The Carters moved quickly through the forest, their footsteps crunching softly against the dry leaves littering the ground. The air was cold and damp, sending shivers down their spines, but they didn't dare slow down. Behind them, the glow of headlights swept across the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. "We need to keep moving," Richard urged, his voice low but firm. He led the way, holding a flashlight that cast weak beams of light ahead of them. "They'll find us if we stop." Laura nodded, clutching her backpack tightly. Inside it were important documents, photographs, and a few essentials they'd grabbed during their hasty escape. She glanced back at Emily, who was struggling to keep up. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she pushed forward without complaint. "Are you okay?" Laura whispered, reaching out to steady her, taught her when she stumbled over a tree root. "I'm fine," Emily replied, though her trembling voice betrayed her nerves. "Just scared." "We're going to be all right," Laura reassured her, squeezing her hand briefly before continuing onward. But even as she said the words, doubt lingered in her mind. Would they really make it out of this alive? After nearly an hour of walking, they reached an old cabin tucked deep within the woods. It belonged to Daniel, the private investigator Laura had contacted earlier. She'd called him just before leaving their house, explaining their situation and asking for help. He'd instructed them to head here, promising to meet them soon. The cabin was small and rustic, with peeling paint and creaky floorboards. Still, it offered temporary shelter, and for now that was enough. Richard locked the door behind them and drew the curtains, ensuring no one could see inside. Then he turned to Laura. "What's the plan?" he asked, his tone urgent. "We can't stay here forever," Laura hesitated, thinking carefully. "Daniel will come tomorrow morning. He knows people who can protect us, people who understand how dangerous Nexus Innovations is. Until then, we lay low." Emily sank onto a worn-out couch, wrapping a blanket around herself. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. They might, Richard admitted, sitting beside her. But we've got each other, and we've got the truth. That's something they can't take away from us. His words seemed to calm her slightly, though the tension in the room remained thick. None of them slept that night. Instead, they took turns keeping watch, listening for any sound that might indicate they weren't alone. By dawn, exhaustion had set in, but relief washed over them when Daniel finally arrived. He was accompanied by two others, a woman named Maria and a man named Jake, both part of an underground network dedicated to exposing corporate corruption. They greeted the Carters warmly but wasted no time getting down to business. "You've uncovered some serious stuff," Maria said, spreading out maps and files on the cabin's rickety table. "Nexus Innovations isn't just experimenting with cloning. They're using it to control people, politicians, scientists, even CEOs. If someone steps out of line, they replace them with replicas programmed to do what they're told." "And Jonathan?" Laura asked, her voice tight with emotion. "What happened to him?" Maria exchanged a glance with Jake before answering. "He figured out too much. When he tried to expose the project, they abducted him and locked him away in a secret facility. We believe he's still alive, but extracting him won't be easy." Richard felt a surge of anger and determination. "Where is he? Tell me where to go and I'll get him out." "It's not that simple," Jake interjected. "The facility is located in the Arctic Circle, heavily guarded and almost impossible to infiltrate. Going in blind would be suicide. But we have to try," Laura insisted, her voice breaking slightly. "He's my husband, the real one, and Richard." She paused, looking at him. "You deserve answers, too. About who you are, why you were created. This is your chance to fight back." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Richard nodded slowly. "All right, let's do this." Over the next few days, the group prepared meticulously for the mission. Maria and Jake provided weapons, disguises, and detailed plans of the facility. They drilled the Carters on what to expect, emphasizing the importance of staying calm under pressure. Meanwhile, Richard continued to experience flashes of Jonathan's memories, which grew clearer with each passing day. One evening, as they reviewed the final preparations, Richard shared something troubling. "I keep seeing things," he confessed, rubbing his temples. "Memories, or dreams, maybe. I see Jonathan being taken. They strapped him to a chair, injected him with something. Then everything goes dark." Laura placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Important details started coming together. That must be how they transfer memories, she realized. Using those neural implants you read about, they extract information directly from the brain and implant it into clones. "So I'm not just a copy," Richard murmured, his voice heavy with realization. "I'm carrying pieces of him, with his thoughts, his feelings. Is that why I feel so connected to him?" "Yes," Laura said softly, "and that makes you stronger than they ever intended. You're not just a tool, Richard. You're proof that humanity can't be erased no matter how hard they try." Her words gave him strength, bolstering his resolve. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he couldn't give up, not for himself, not for his family, and certainly not for Jonathan. Finally, the day of the mission arrived. The team boarded a small plane bound for the Arctic, bracing themselves for the challenges to come. As they flew over endless stretches of snow and ice, Emily stared out the window, her expression somber. "What happens if we fail?" she asked, voicing the question everyone had been avoiding. "We won't," Richard said firmly, meeting her gaze. "We've come too far to turn back now." When they landed, the temperature plummeted, biting at their skin despite layers of clothing. The facility loomed in the distance, a fortress of steel and concrete surrounded by barbed wire fences and armed guards. It looked impenetrable, but the Carters had faced impossible odds before. Under the cover of darkness, they approached cautiously, sticking to the shadows. Maria and Jake handled the initial breach, disabling security systems and creating diversions to draw attention away from the main entrance. Once inside, the Carters split off, following a map that led to the holding cells where Jonathan was believed to be kept. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, Richard felt another wave of memories crashing over him. This time they were vivid and overwhelming, images of pain, fear, and defiance. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. These weren't just echoes of the past, they were guiding him, showing him the way. At last, they reached the cell. Through the reinforced glass they saw him, Jonathan. His hair was grayer, his face thinner, but there was no mistaking his resemblance to Richard. When he spotted them, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Laura," he whispered hoarsely, pressing his hands against the glass. "It's me," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "We're getting you out of here." With Jake's help, they managed to unlock the door and free him. Jonathan staggered forward, leaning heavily on Richard for support. For a brief moment, the two men locked eyes, recognizing the inexplicable bond between them. "Thank you," Jonathan murmured, his voice barely audible. "For everything." But their reunion was cut short by the sound of alarms blaring throughout the facility. Guards were closing in and they had only moments to escape. With adrenaline coursing through their veins, the Carters fled alongside Maria, Jake, and Jonathan, retracing their steps toward the exit. Bullets whizzed past them as they ran, narrowly missing their targets. Just when it seemed like they wouldn't make it, Daniel appeared outside with a snowmobile, shouting for them to hurry. One by one, they climbed aboard, speeding away from the chaos behind them. As they disappeared into the icy wilderness, Richard glanced back at the burning facility, feeling a strange sense of closure. No matter what came next, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a clone. He was a man fighting for his family, his identity, and his future. The journey back from the Arctic was long and grueling, but it felt like a new beginning for the Carter family. They had escaped the facility with Jonathan alive, though weakened by years of captivity. Now, as they sat together in their small rented cabin, the same one Daniel had provided during their escape, they allowed themselves to breathe freely for the first time in weeks. Jonathan looked around the room, taking in the faces of his loved ones. Laura was beside him, holding his hand tightly, tears still glistening in her eyes. Across from them, Richard sat quietly, observing everything with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. And next to Richard, Emily leaned forward, her expression filled with curiosity and hope. "I can't believe you're really here," Laura said, her voice trembling slightly. "After all these years?" Jonathan smiled weakly, squeezing her hand. "I never stopped thinking about you or Emily. Every day I hoped you'd find me." "We did," Emily chimed in, her voice breaking through the emotional tension. "And we couldn't have done it without Richard." She turned to look at him, her gratitude evident. "You saved us all." Richard shifted uncomfortably under the spotlight. He wasn't used to being called a hero, especially not after everything he'd learned about himself. "I didn't do it alone," he replied modestly. "We worked together. That's what got us through." Jonathan studied Richard carefully, noting the striking resemblance between them. It was eerie, yet somehow comforting. "So, you're my clone?" he asked gently, not wanting to upset anyone. "In a way, yes," Richard admitted, meeting his gaze. "But I'm also my own person. Your memories, your experiences, they're part of me now, but so are mine." Jonathan nodded, slowly processing this revelation. "That must be strange for you, living with someone else's past inside your head." "It is," Richard confessed. "But it's also helped me understand who I am and who you are, and maybe that's something we can build on." Laura reached out, placing a hand on both men's shoulders. "You're both important to this family. No matter what happened before, we're together now. That's what matters." Her words brought a sense of calm to the room, easing the lingering tension. For the first time since their ordeal began, they felt like a united front, a family ready to face whatever came next. Over the following days, they focused on healing and rebuilding their lives. Jonathan needed time to recover physically and mentally from his years in captivity, but he was determined to make up for lost time. He spent hours talking to Emily, learning about her dreams and accomplishments and reconnecting with Laura over quiet evenings by the fire. Meanwhile, Richard continued to process his dual identity. Some days, flashes of Jonathan's memories still surfaced unexpectedly, but instead of fighting them, he embraced them as pieces of a puzzle that made him whole. He realized that while he might not have been born in the traditional sense, his existence had meaning, not just because of his origins, but because of the choices he'd made and the people he cared about. One afternoon, as snow fell softly, outside the four of them gathered around the dining table to discuss their future. Maria and Jake had offered to help them relocate somewhere safe, far away from Nexus Innovations' reach. But beyond that, they needed to decide how to move forward as a family. "What do you want to do?" Laura asked Jonathan, giving him space to share his thoughts. "Do you want to go back to science or start fresh?" Jonathan considered this for a moment. "I think I'd like to keep working, but not for corporations like Nexus. Maybe I could join forces with Maria and Jake's network, help expose the truth about projects like Echo." "That sounds perfect," Laura said, smiling. "You've always had a passion for making the world better. Let's use that." "And what about you, Richard?" Jonathan asked, turning to him. "Do you feel like staying with us, or forging your own path?" Richard hesitated, unsure how to answer. On one hand, he loved his family deeply and wanted to stay with them. On the other hand, he knew he needed to explore who he truly was, an individual shaped by both nature and nurture. "I think I'll stick around for now," he said finally. "Help protect everyone. But maybe someday I'll figure out what's uniquely mine. What makes me, me." No one pressured him for more than that. They understood that his journey was ongoing, and they were willing to support him every step of the way. As weeks turned into months, life began to settle into a rhythm. With Jonathan's guidance, Richard started learning more about astrophysics, finding inspiration in Emily's passion for the stars. Together, they worked on small experiments, bonding over shared interests and discoveries. Emily thrived under their encouragement, already planning applications for graduate programs. Laura, meanwhile, channeled her energy into advocacy work. Using the evidence they'd gathered, she collaborated with Maria and Jake to expose Nexus Innovations' unethical practices. Their efforts sparked outrage worldwide, leading to investigations and reforms within the scientific community. Though the fight wasn't over, they took pride in knowing they'd made a difference. Through it all, the Carters remained close-knit, leaning on each other during moments of doubt or fear. They celebrated milestones together. Emily's acceptance into a prestigious university, Jonathan's return to public speaking engagements, even Richard's decision to pursue art as a creative outlet. Each achievement reminded them of how far they'd come. One evening, as they gathered around the fireplace, Laura raised a toast. "To us," she said, her voice warm with affection, "for surviving, for fighting, and for finding our way back to each other." "To us," the others echoed, clinking their glasses. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, however, there was warmth and laughter, a testament to the resilience of love and the power of truth. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the Carters faced them as one, a family bound not just by blood but by choice and courage. And in that moment, they knew they'd overcome anything, together.